I'm Lorraine Ballard-Morrill, Director of News and Community Affairs for iHeartMedia Philadelphia, and I am so delighted to be with these two amazing men. They are representatives of some of the great talent that we've had the fortune to have associated with WDAS as we celebrate our 70th anniversary. And let me introduce them right now. We've got Gary Shepherd. He is President, CEO, and founder of Third Floor Media, and we also have a longtime member of the WDAS family, and we also have Doug Henderson, who is one of our top account executives. He was also on the air for many, many years, and he comes from a long line of family members who were part of this WDAS family. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to start with you, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
You told me something a little bit earlier that I was not aware of, and that is your history with DAS really started back in the 70s. Tell us more.
Well, actually, as we record this, we're like 4 days out of me celebrating. No, actually, what's the date? The 9th? Yeah.
Yes.
4 days out of me celebrating 45 years here in Philadelphia. I started on the air at WDAS June 5th, 1975. And I worked at WDAS AM with Georgie Woods, Carl Helm, Butterball, of course. Kay Williams was there at the time too. And there were others. And, you know, it was just a different kind of experience for me moving from Detroit to a completely different city. And it was like it was the second move I had made in about 3 years. So, you know, I was working in Tampa, Florida, moved back to Detroit. And then from Detroit, Butterball talked with Jerry Bolding. Do you remember that name?
Mm.
Jerry Bolding was one of the top programmers in urban radio in the country. So Jerry and Butter were talking. Butter was looking for someone. At the time, Jimmy Bishop had just left the radio station, and they were looking for someone to kind of take his place. So, you know, they made the call, and I talked with Jerry Bolding, and Jerry talked with Butter, and I talked with Butter, and flew me over a couple times. And, you know, I guess the rest, as they say, is history.
I'm going to put a pin on that and get back to more of that experience of what it was like to be at WDAS at that time. But let's go back to Doug Henderson. Doug, first of all, let's talk about your dad. Tell us about Jocko Henderson.
All props to Pops. You know, I always say any success I've achieved in radio, I owe directly to him. Jocko was such an enigmatic personality, an icon, considering the times he was flourishing. We're talking circa late 1950s through the early 70s. And he was really unique. And in terms of what he did, how he did his programming, when he came to Philadelphia from Baltimore, he was over at WHAT first, and then Bob Klein hired him away to WDAS 1480. He would do a live show there, hop on the train, go up to New York, do another live show at WADO, same day, promoted shows at the Apollo, had a television show that was on in Newark, and all the time that this was going on, there was an engineer at the studio at the house punching up pre-recorded things on cart to send out on the bus. There was no FedEx back then, on the bus to about 7 different cities. So what he was doing at the time was truly unprecedented in radio, and particularly for an African American. You know, when they were building the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, they made sure they called me to make sure that they had some Jocko memorabilia for opening day.
Doug, I have a story about Jocko. And I've told you this before, and I had the privilege and the honor to tell him as well. So when I was a little boy, there's a radio station in the Detroit area called WCHB. It was built in the 1950s from the ground up to be a Black radio station to service the African-American community in the greater Detroit area. It was built by some dentists, Dr. Wendell Cox, Dr. Haley Bell, and Dr. Robert Bass. Wendell Cox, Haley Bell, WCHB. So I would listen to that. And Jocko had a show on WCHB. And you know how Jocko used to always do his rap, right? He did the,
Hit it, Gary.
yeah, this is the Jocko, and I'm back on the scene with the record machine, you know? So sometimes whoever the engineer was at WCHB would place it over maybe one of my favorite parts of the song. So I called the radio station. I said, could you please ask Jocko not to talk over my favorite part of the song? Not knowing at the time that he was one of the first African-American radio personalities to do syndicated programming that went out to these different cities that you were talking about. So when I moved to Philadelphia, met Jock, I told him that story. We laughed, man. We had a ball laughing at it.
That is a great story. Doug, as you were growing up as a kid and watching your dad, what was that like?
Well, it was always very interesting. When we moved here on Wissahickon Avenue in the early 60s, there's a studio downstairs, and there were always great parties. I mean, this is almost like a historical site. Hubert Humphrey, when he was vice president of the United States, was here. Muhammad Ali has come to this house. James Brown as well. And on the controversial side, Frank Rizzo as well. And I remember they made a scene from a movie. There was a movie, a Disney movie, not animated, but it was called The In Crowd, and it starred Joe Pantoliano. You've seen him all around. He was in Bad Boys. He played on The Sopranos on HBO. He was the star. His name in the flick was Perry Parker. It was supposed to be a parody on Dick Clark. And there was a scene, this was, Perry Parker / Dick Clark's house. And there's a scene, there's a big bay window right behind me. And they took that whole bay window out because there was a scene where they threw somebody through it. And, they did the take, and Dick Clark threatened to sue the production because it's sort of dug into some of the shadier side of the music industry. So they had to take that whole scene out, and they turned it into this mundane teenage love story. But this house has a lot of history. Even the mural behind me, that was done by one of Jocko's close friends and business associates. He was a writer, producer. His name was Bob Crew, and some of the songs that he wrote were Sherry Baby by the Four Seasons and Big Girls Don't Cry. And there's different memorabilia like that throughout the house here.
Gary, WDAS has been in different locations at different times in its history. You were back down in Fairmount Park?
Belmont and Edgeley.
Yeah, tell us what the building was like back then.
Falling apart. No.
Okay.
Well, the building itself, it wasn't what one would consider state of the art, and I think Doug would agree with me on that. I mean, we had turntables at the time, and obviously the new technology hadn't come into play back then. So it was in some areas and states of disrepair, but I think the building had a feeling to it. There was a feel to it. Whenever we all would come together as a group, as a family, we would share that kind of feeling that building had. Whenever any of the record promotion men would come out, we were all a big family. They would bring out some of the biggest stars that were out at the Jacksons. The biggest stars at the time would come through WDAS because they realized it was a powerhouse, not just in Philadelphia, but across the nation. So that kind of feeling embodied the place. And in fact, when we used to give the weather, we would give the temperature in different places, and we would say, and in the park, it's 85 degrees right here in Fairmount Park. So it was a nice place to work, nice place to be. It had some peacefulness to it as well.
Except when Otto was in the lobby.
Otto, tell us more. Otto?
Yeah, Otto was the security guy. And just to parallel the timeline, Gary, if you said you started in June of 75, I know I started April 6th, 1975 on the AM station, then moved over to FM. So a lot of ways our careers paralleled each other. Same with Jocko and I. We both did radio, crossed over and did some television, the personal appearances. And I think what really was memorable. I mean, to this day, I'll walk around the street. People say, hey, Doug, you know, recognize your voice on the telephone. You know, you have no idea how much that humbles me. And all of that was cumulative over the years because as personalities at WDAS, AM, and FM, we weren't just voices on the air. And Lorraine, and you can concur with this as well. We were faces in the community.
Yes.
Yeah, Georgie Woods marched with Malcolm back in the day. And, you know, it's sort of a different WDAS now. I'm sure we might have been, you know, taking a different level of participation in all of the protesting that's gone on. Yeah, I've seen the dogs. I've seen the fire hoses. I remember when Frank Rizzo was trying to run for an unprecedented third term as mayor, the voter registration drive we did, people coming down Edgeley Road in droves. Unity Day, to this day, the largest radio-driven outdoor activity. And we did that for 30 years. So, you know, so much history connected to WDAS. And there's probably about a handful of radio stations across the country that could even match that impactful and iconic level that a WDAS has.
Gary, I'd like to talk about the impact that the station had in the community. I know that I came to Philadelphia in 1980, and when I came here, DAS was the station. That was the station even at that time. And of course, Unity Day was this extraordinary event, as Doug mentioned, the largest event of that kind in the country. But DAS has had a long history of activism and having a strong connection to the community. So let's talk more about that, Gary.
So, you know, arguably, and I wanted to mention something, a couple of things Doug said. Arguably, Unity Day was the precursor of all these festivals that you see going on the Ben Franklin Parkway to this day. I mean, that was the model for Unity Day, except you didn't have to pay. It was free. We had 5, 6 different stages that, you know, went out into the community and, you know, reflected the culture of the diverse culture of the city of Philadelphia. So I say that it was a precursor to these events that are taking place now. And Doug, you mentioned something about walking down the street and people recognize your voice or seeing you. That just happened to me as I was rushing into my office to get ready for this call. There was a woman standing on the corner and I spoke to her and she spoke. And then she walked a little closer and she said, "Is that Gary Shepherd?" I thought it was you. You know, I was, oh, okay, yeah. So that kind of thing continues to happen to me. And I haven't been on radio itself since 2007, I think.
I want to get back to Unity Day for a second.
Mhm.
Let's talk about the origins of Unity Day. I mean, Unity Day was called Unity Day for a reason, right?
Oh, absolutely. You know, just to bring the city together, to show that, you know, the moniker of the city of brotherly love, and it was added a little bit later on, and sisterly affection. Again, just to show the different cultures in the city, how we could live together in peace and also celebrate those cultures. And it was education. Doug mentioned about not just being a personality on the air, but representative of the voice of the community. And that's what it was all about, representing those different cultures within the city of Philadelphia and the entire region to come together in a peaceful way for a free event that took place on the Parkway. And it was just fabulous.
And I do recall in my historical, research that was actually a time of gang violence in Philadelphia. That there are a lot of community organizers who are working. Mothers were getting together to try to fight gang violence. So Unity Day really served as a platform, as you said, Gary, to show that people can come together with unity, with peace. And that was a very powerful visual representation of the potential that we have as a city. And Unity Day really exemplified that, I think.
Yeah,
Doug,
well, it
what are your thoughts?
started in the park and then it moved down to the Ben Franklin Parkway. It
Right.
was, it started right there, right around the corner from the radio station when it first started. But then it grew so big. It became the Days of Unity.
You need
because we
me.
had several events leading up to that day.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder if either of you could share some experience or some anecdote that really stands out in your mind about your time at WDAS.
Well, I remember, as I said, voice on the air, face in the community. Man, I'll just tell you how I got started. You know, when I was a kid, I would emulate my father going to the studio, and I knew how to work the board and do all of that stuff. But I never really considered being an air personality. I was a business major at Penn State. So when I came home, I was a photographer for a while at a magazine that Jocko had called Philly Talk. Take a walk, pick up on Philly Talk, which was a local African American oriented magazine. And then, you know, I needed a job. So Jocko took me by the station. Butter was on the air in the old AM studio. Butter got up. He said, "Junior, sit down." That's what Butter used to call me, Junior. And he was like a second father. Because I'd emulated my father's style and knew how to, you know, work the board and everything, I just sat right down. He said, "We're going to play a game called Sink or Swim." You know, and fortunately, I was always a pretty good swimmer. And that was back in '75. And some days I would work AM and FM in the same day. So you had to change your delivery. "Hey, it's 1480 WDAS. We got the boss. Jocks play the ball sounds because the boss tells us to." They're like, "Yeah, 5.3 WDAS FM. Kick back with Max and let me be good to you." So, yeah, it was just an interesting scenario. But because of being on the air and being in the community, I went to places that I would normally never go, met people and encountered people that I would normally never have a chance to encounter. And what I found is no matter how poverty ridden, how downtrodden, how economically disadvantaged the area or the people may be in that particular area, there are good people everywhere.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Eric, what about you? What are some memories or a memory that really stands out for you?
is that for me?
Yeah, that's for you.
Oh,
Gary.
I kind of, I've had the same experience that Doug's had. I mean, it's really something. And Doug and I became friends right from the beginning. We're frat brothers, and we became friends right from the beginning. And just being out in the community, like he said, I went places that I never would have imagined that I would be going, but was always welcomed warmly by the community. They hear the name, and it still happens to this day. They hear the name, and people perk up, they smile. The funny thing that does happen to me now is people will say, "Well, what station are you on now?" So, I'll explain to them, well, I actually started a boutique advertising agency with full production capability. We're a marketing firm, and I go through that whole bit. And so when their eyes are finished glossing over, they come back and say, "Okay, so what station are you on now?" But just those kinds of experience. I mean, I remember once when there was a young lady I had met. It was later on. It was probably maybe the early 2000s. And we were talking, and they were telling me about how I came to their house to deliver what it was, either a prize package or something. How I came to their house, and they remembered it, very much so. And they were telling me about it, and I was trying to remember it. And so I asked them, now, mind you, this is the early 2000s. I said, "So when was that now?" "Oh, that was 1987, they said. So I said, "Oh, yeah, I remember now." Didn't have the foggiest. But that one incident when she approached me with that story, I do definitely remember that one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but there have been many, many, many different instances of people just showing their kindness and welcoming spirit.
Yeah. DAS has meant so much to so many people who are new listeners, but also the people that have been listening all along. There's a feeling of attachment, really, that this is the family. It's part of people's family. That's the soundtrack of people's lives, right?
Yeah.
DAS has been that.
Oh, yeah. And I stay in touch with Patty all the time. We haven't talked recently, but I will text or I'll call. Actually, I say this, I was Patty Jackson's first boss when I was program director at WSSJ, and Patty wanted to get into radio. She became an intern under Paul Perello, who was my news director at the time. And Patty came on board, worked at WSSJ, and you see where she is now. Patty's the queen of Philadelphia radio.
Yep. Well,
Yeah.
I wonder if you can have some final words. What are your parting words about WDAS celebrating its 70th anniversary?
Yeah, a lot has transpired in 70 years. It used to be AM was the dominant signal. You know, FM wasn't too popular, but then as the technology improved and people began listening in stereo, the FM wave really came into dominance in the market. In fact, WDAS FM was the first FM station ever to be #1 in the market in the ratings, supplanting KYW, which was the perennial market leader. But you know, hey, it's all about the music. I call it the new R&B, not rhythm and blues. It's rhythm and business now, and that's okay with me. I was always a business person. I learned that from Jocko. He said, "Boy, you got to turn what you do on the air and the money off the air, and you know, pursue those multiple sources of income opportunities, crossing over to television, do some things. Had one of the first of its kind video shows called City Sounds that Bob Lott produced. I think, Gary, you were the announcer as well. So you know, we're talking circa early 80s, before MTV and VH1, and we were on in about 54 markets, 4 out of the top 5. You know, just want to talk about Jocko's impact on the rap and hip hop culture. As Gary, you know, did the little spiel, Jocko was considered one of the first rappers, and those who are truly knowledgeable in the hip hop genre, the Chuck D's of the world and the Commons, you know, they know this about Jocko. And you know, it was just such an enigmatic figure, you know, just to be part of that, you know. And hey, you know, Jocko leaves these big imprints, these big footprints in the sand or in the snow that I could I could never fill, you know, even though I consider myself having a good career. And then transitioning over to the business side, you know, I still want to get active in the creative side. I do a lot of voiceover for my clients and any type of production that I can assist in. But hey, the station's going to go on and on. Yes, it's changed owners: iHeart, Clear Channel, AM, FM, Evergreen, Beasley, Unity, and on back to the originator, Max Leon and Bob Klein, who originally hired me. So, and the whole impact of audio. Radio is bigger than ever. Television's audience has eroded. Of course, we know what's happening to the whole print medium. Yes, digital is here to stay, but radio's audience over a span of 25 years has been constant, reaching 93% of all Americans every week. Why? Because we're your companion.
And Gary, what about you?
Sound like you're making a pitch right now.
I know. All right, now how many spots can I put you down for?
You're doing so well. And Gary, what are your final words?
So you mentioned about, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. It's a funny thing, you know, people in the community still recognize, but sometimes your colleagues do not. And, you know, that's kind of a hurting, you know, feeling to me. But so I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of this in terms of the celebration. I mentioned I've been here 45 years, and that's a majority out of 70, and still affiliated and associated with WDAS over all of those years. I was able to work at the location at Belmont and Edgeley, was able to work at the location on City Avenue, and I really loved that studio because you could see outdoors, you could see in the front, you could see in the back. The AM studio was right behind us. And also worked at the current location where you are located right now. So I just want to thank you and just thank the people of Philadelphia for just welcoming me. I have my, as Pastor Alan Waller says, I have my Philly card. I got my Philly card now. I've been here long enough. So, but just thank you so much, and keep doing the good work that you do, Lorraine. You and I have been friends for a long time also. So I want to thank you for the work you do.
Well, that
Yeah, And Lorraine, as Gary attributed to the personalities of the AM station, there's a whole lineage of air personalities that really shaped that FM station. Jerry Wells, Reverend Louise Bishop, Mimi Brown, Butterball, of course, the good doctor, Dr. Perry Johnson, Wayne Joel, Primus, Tony Brown, the original space traveler. So, all of these people really helped to mold WDAS into the iconic brand that it has been for the 70 years in the past, and will continue to be in the future. And thank you as well, Lorraine. Love you. You know that.
Well, love you both, and what a pleasure it has been to speak to both of you and have you share your stories and your history. Your voices continue to enlighten folks in whatever form it takes, recognizable voices and personalities that are very much a part of the fabric of WDAS. As we celebrate our 70th anniversary, Doug Henderson, longtime air personality, currently working in our business side. Of course, Gary Shepherd, again, longtime air personality, founder and president and CEO of Third Floor Media, continuing to enlighten and engage our community in his own way through the business space. Thank you both so much. This has been an absolute delight, and thank you for being a part of our 70th anniversary.
You're welcome. We could go on for days.
I know, and I would love that.
Oh, yeah. Everybody is related to what's happening socially now. Yes, social change is going to come. Change is constant and inevitable. May take some time, but there is an actionable item that everybody can do now, and that's register to vote and follow through and vote in November.
That's right. Vote.
Absolutely. What a great message to end on. Thank you all.